You already said that I'm something like an anti-physicalist, or I don't have a physicalist understanding of consciousness. And for me, this view has two important elements. One concerns properties, and the other concerns individuals. The properties concerned are what I call experiential properties, and I will give a definition in a moment. Just to give you an idea, to be sad, to see a certain color tonality is an experiential property. So I'm a dualist about those properties, in the sense that I would like to say they do not have a physical nature. But I'm also a physicalist about certain kinds of individuals, namely those individuals that we are subjects of experience, those who have those experiential properties. I'm not going to talk about this part of my view today in this presentation. I'm only talking about property dualism with respect to experiential properties. The argument that I'm going to aim at in this talk, I like to call it the argument from understanding. Why? Because it will be crucial for the argument that I claim that we have a certain understanding by having certain concepts of those experiential properties. We have an understanding of what it is to have them, of their very nature. And that's the thesis that I will call phenomenal essentialism. And that is at the heart of the argument that I will be presenting. So here is the plan. I will suggest a certain view about the nature of phenomenal concepts. I will say a bit more about what they are immediately. My view is that there are what I call genuine property concepts. They are not, as many people think, demonstrative concepts, indexical concepts, or so-called quotational concepts. What are phenomenal concepts? Phenomenal concepts are concepts that we use to attribute to other experiencing subjects certain kinds of properties, namely these experiential properties, of which I already gave two examples. Famous example is the phenomenal concept of being in pain. The phenomenal concept of being in pain, according to most of those who are involved in the discussion, is formed based on one's own acquaintance. Someone is...
I already muted them.
Oh, okay, good. So I was going to say that in general, and I was saying this about the particular case of being in pain, the concept of being in pain, the concept of being in pain, the phenomenal concept of being in pain is acquired based on one's own experience of pain. So that's what is specific about phenomenal concept. Someone who never saw colors, according to this understanding of phenomenal concepts, could not have a phenomenal concept, of seeing a color of a certain tonality, of seeing turquoise, for instance. The second thing I would like to do then in the talk is to motivate the thesis that I already mentioned, namely the thesis of phenomenal essentialism, which states that certain phenomenal concepts, not all, but certain phenomenal concepts, are nature revealing. They give us access to what it is to have the relevant property. Philip Goff calls those concepts transparent. So that's synonymous. I call them nature revealing. We can call them transparent as well. And then I will explore the consequences of phenomenal essentialism by presenting an argument that uses as one of its premises phenomenal essentialism. And I will briefly look at the way the physicalist might react to this kind of reasoning. So I would like to say a little more about what experiential properties are. I first introduce a broad notion of experiential properties. Later in the talk, I will introduce sub-kinds of experiential properties that I will actually need for the argument. A property is an experiential property in the broad sense, if and only if, due to what it takes to have that property, and thereby I mean what it just is to have the property, to the nature of that property, the following is true. Whenever that property is instantiated, then there is a subject such that there is something it is like for that subject to have that property in that instantiation. Now, as you can see, I'm using this famous locution introduced into the discussion by Thomas Nagel in his seminal article, What It's Like to Be a Bat. He uses it in order to talk about what it's like to be a certain organism. That's not the way I'm using it here. I'm really applying it to having properties. So I would like to distinguish between properties such that by the nature of the property, there is a way it's like for the subject to have them, and properties that are not like this. I don't think that this definition is a reductive definition. And by this, I mean to say that I don't take this locution, this Nagelian locution, to be some more fundamental notion, to express some more fundamental notion than the one we want to introduce, to which then we deduce what an experiential property is. That's not how I understand that definition. Rather, I would like to see things in the following way. We must have in mind certain concrete examples that are clear cases of experiential properties. And then that definition hints to a certain commonality of those. And based on that locution, one is hoping that everybody will understand what commonality of those properties one should have in mind as characterizing experiential properties. Now, my claim will be that phenomenal concepts of those experiential properties are what I will call genuine property concepts. And in order for that claim to be understandable, I must talk about what I mean by property concepts. So, in a first approximation that's very simple, property concepts are concepts that are used in thought in order to attribute properties to individuals. And I talk of genuine property concepts because I want to exclude properties that we can introduce, concepts that introduce properties without including any understanding of what it is to have that property. So for instance, if I don't have any idea of what Paul had in mind this morning, but for some reason, I'm convinced that there was a specific property that he was thinking about. And then I talk about this property saying the first property Paul had in mind this morning. This is not a genuine property concept in the sense that I would like to introduce. It's still a property concept because it can then be used to attribute a property. It's still a property concept, but it's not a genuine one in that sense that it doesn't involve any understanding of what it is to have the property that is attributed by the concept. Now, what is important for the view I will suggest is a certain background conviction that I would briefly like to mention, namely that the relation that we have between concepts that are used to refer to individuals, so the relation between the concept and the worldly item in this case, and the relation that exists between a property concept and the worldly item that it is used to pick out, so to speak, namely the corresponding property, that these two relations are fundamentally different. So I formulated it here on your slide in the following way: the relation between an individual concept like Venus, Aristoteles, something like that, and the worldly item picked out by that concept, the planet or the person, is fundamentally different in nature from the relation between a property concept and the property the concept serves to attribute. And I do think that this is somehow hidden in contemporary discussion because one is used to talk of reference in all those cases. And one doesn't really acknowledge that one is talking about a very heterogeneous kind of relations when these two types of concepts are concerned. So here is a preliminary description of the difference. I hope that the background conviction will become much clearer in the course of the talk. In the first case, that is in the case where we use an individual concept in order to pick out a person or a planet or something else. One simply makes a certain object, a certain thing, entity, the object of one's thought. In the second case, by using the concept in one's thought, so I'm now talking about property concepts, genuine property concept, one is doing something totally different. One thinks of something, of some entity, as fulfilling a certain condition, and one thereby has a certain understanding of that condition in mind. So this makes it perhaps already clear that I think that in the case of property concepts, the understanding of the one who uses the concept plays a crucial role. It even plays, as we will see, a crucial role in picking out the worldly item at issue. While in the first case, in the case of individual concepts, this is not so. No understanding of what it is to be Venus is necessary for you to be able to use the word Venus or the associated individual concept of Venus in order to make Venus, the planet, the object of your thought. Now, here is an attempt at characterizing a bit more precisely what I mean by genuine property concepts. And I would like to characterize genuine property concepts by three conditions. A concept is a genuine property concept of a given property P, if and only if the concept serves to attribute that property. Thinking in terms of that concept involves having some substantial understanding of what it is to have that property. By substantial understanding, I mean something like it has a certain content, that understanding. It's a contentful understanding. And this is to make the contrast to cases, as I mentioned before, the property Paul thought about this morning. That wouldn't involve any substantial understanding of what it is to have the property picked out in that manner. And third, and perhaps this is the more important condition that will play a certain role in what follows. The concept serves to attribute that specific property rather than some other property in virtue of the way a subject who has that concept understands what it is to have that property. So perhaps it's clear from what I just said that I see a further disanalogy between individual concepts and property concepts. In both cases, we can ask the question, in virtue of what does the concept pick out what it really picks out? In the case of the concept Venus, the understanding of the person doesn't seem to play a very crucial role. It's some kind of causal relation or being part of the community where there is this causal relation to the planet at issue, whatever exact theory you would like to subscribe to. Contrary to this, or this is what I would like to argue for, in the case of property concepts, is really the understanding of the one who has acquired the concept that is responsible for the relation between the concept and the property, is responsible for that property being the one that's picked out rather than another. So let me apply this characterization of genuine property concepts to a concrete example of an experiential property, of a concept of an experiential property. So I invite you to consider the phenomenal concept of visually experiencing blue. And thereby I mean an experience that is characterized by it being a specific tonality, namely the tonality that we call blue, that you are presented with in your visual experience. The visual experience can be a perception, it can be an illusion, it can be a hallucination, it can be a dream. All those cases have something phenomenally manifest in common if they are correctly characterized as being an experience of blue. And we have a phenomenal concept of that experiential property I'd like to suggest. And now it's a property concept, and it's a genuine property concept. And what does that mean now, given the characterization that was on the previous slide? That means that the phenomenal concept of visually experiencing blue is used in thought to attribute that experiential property, not only to oneself, of course, but also to others. So I would like to suggest that we only have a concept of that property if we are capable of thinking of other experiencing subjects as potentially having that same experiential property that we are familiar with based on our own experience. That's the first condition. Second, thinking in terms of that concept involves some substantial understanding of what it is for a subject to have that experiential property. And I will say something more about this, but what substantial understanding does one should you have in mind here? So it's the understanding that you have acquired by seeing blue things and by focusing on the way it's like to be presented with that tonality, on its contribution, so to speak, to the phenomenology of your overall state in which you are when you see something as blue. When you see an object and it changes its color from blue to green, then the phenomenology of your overall state will change accordingly. The tonality of a thing that you see contributes to the way it's like for you to live through the moment at issue. And that's what it is to see something as blue. That contribution to the overall phenomenology is really what you need to understand in order to know what it is, and for someone to have that experiential property. And one has a certain understanding of that. So the condition B is plausibly fulfilled. And the third condition, the concept serves to attribute that experiential property rather than some other experiential property or other property in virtue of the way a subject that has this concept understands what it is for a subject to have it. And now I would like to illustrate this, in particular the third condition, by a concrete example. It's the example that I call sunset. So the example involves two people, Rachel and Paul, who are watching together a sunset. And they both enjoy the color of a specific cloud that they are looking at and perhaps talking about. Rachel is normally sighted, and the cloud looks violet to her, the way that the cloud looks to normally sighted people in that situation. Paul is pseudonormal. So pseudonormal, that's someone whose retina is in a certain condition, which as a consequence involves that the person concerned sees greenish where others see reddish, and vice versa. So when Paul looks at the cloud, then it doesn't look reddish blue to him, but greenish blue to him. Okay. It's not important why I use the term pseudonormal here. I can tell you a story about this if you want during the discussion. It's just important that you understand Paul sees that violet, that cloud as turquoise due to some condition concerning his visual system. And Rachel sees it as violet. But none of them knows, that's important here for the example, that Paul is pseudonormal. So both believe that they see the cloud in the same color tonality. Okay, so what does that mean for their beliefs about the other? Rachel believes, using her phenomenal concept of visually experiencing violet, that Paul sees the cloud as violet. Paul believes, using his phenomenal concept of visually experiencing turquoise, that Rachel sees the cloud as turquoise. Why does Rachel have the first belief? Because she thinks that Paul is normally sighted and that she is normally sighted, and so that the tonality they are presented with is the same. And for Paul, why does he believe that she sees it as turquoise? Because he sees it as turquoise, and he also believes that he is normally sighted. So he believes as well that Rachel sees it in the way that he sees it. They are both wrong about the color experience of the other person. They are both wrong, of course. Now, it's important to be clear that this belief, these beliefs, in particular, Paul's belief, would not show up in what he says. We wouldn't realize that he has a false belief about Rachel and that he believes that she sees the cloud as turquoise. Because, of course, he has learned language like everybody has at the presence of certain objects. And so he has acquired the concept, the color concept applied to object turquoise in the presence of violet things. And he always thought that when people say that this looks violet, what they had in mind was that it looks like things look to him, that when he sees things that are called violet, namely turquoise. So he has the belief that Rachel sees the cloud. He would say that Rachel sees the cloud as violet, and yet he would thereby express the belief that Rachel sees the cloud as turquoise. So Paul's phenomenal concept involved in his belief about Rachel serves to attribute a certain experiential property, namely visually experiencing turquoise. So now we are back to the question, what determines what property is picked out by a given concept of someone? And I think it's very clear, or well illustrated at least, by this example, that it's in virtue of Paul's understanding of what it is for a subject to have that experiential property, that he attributes via that concept, visually being presented with turquoise and not being visually presented with violet. It's the way he understands what it is, what it takes to have the property that he attributes when he uses the concept that he uses in that particular belief about Rachel. Okay, so far I have been trying to explain and motivate the view that I abbreviate here as GPA, the general property account. That's the abbreviation, general property account of phenomenal concepts. So the view that phenomenal concepts are genuine property concepts. And now I would like to contrast that with another view. There are many other views about phenomenal concepts on the market, so to speak. I picked the demonstrative account, which is particularly well-known. One of those who have defended it is John Perry. So the view is that phenomenal concepts are demonstrative concepts. And I hope that DPA, the claim that I would like to defend, will become clearer by this contrast with this alternative. And I will try to explain that contrast by expressing what is wrong with the demonstrative account from the perspective of the account that I propose to you. And here I actually use this old example of Mariana that implicitly has been referred to at the in the introduction at the beginning by Johannes. So I use the case of Mariana that I will present immediately in order to explain what the GPA doesn't like about the demonstrative account. So here's the example. It's a variant or a variation of the very famous example of Frank Jackson involving Mary. So until a certain date, say May 13th at noon, Mariana never had any color experience. After that moment, she's allowed to live in a beautifully colored environment. She sees no bananas, however, no pictures of landscapes, and so on and so forth. Why this detail? Because we want, for this example, to prevent her from being able to associate the names of colors that she has learned with her color experience. So she cannot find out which color she's now familiar with is called blue, red, etc. And she has heard, however, because people talked to her and she has read many books, that the sky looks blue to normally sighted people. But there's a sense in which she doesn't know which color people see. She doesn't know yet which color people see when they look at the sky. And she may be wondering about this, and we can imagine her to be in the following situation. She has slides, monochromatic slides, a blue one, a red one, a green one, and she can go back and forth between these slides. And then she can wonder which of these colors that she sees on those slides normally sighted people experience when they see the cloudless sky during the day. And for some reason, doesn't matter which one, she finally believes, while looking at the blue one, that normally sighted people experience that color when they see the cloudless sky during the day. So that's the example. And now I would like to use this example to make a few points. People disagree about the epistemic progress of Mariana in that case. So we all agree, I guess, she makes an epistemic progress when finally she comes to this conviction that it's this slide, the blue one, that shows the color of the sky. What exactly is the progress that she has made? So according to the demonstrative account, and now I have to be more precise, I'm considering the whole epistemic progress from the moment in which she didn't know colors. She had never seen any colors from her own experience, and the moment when she has acquired the capacity, when she has made acquaintance with colors because her environment is now full of colors and it wasn't before, and has formed the belief about what people experience when they look at the sky. So I'm looking at this whole thing and wonder, well, it's an epistemic progress, but what does the epistemic progress exactly consist in? Now, people who defend the demonstrative view about phenomenal concepts say the following. She has acquired new concepts, namely new demonstrative concepts, concepts that involve some kind of pointing. People often talk of inner pointing. It's not really the color one is, so to speak, demonstratively referring to, according to those people, but the type of experience one is having, right? One demonstratively refers to this kind of experience that I'm now having when I look at that slide. And in addition, so new concept, new demonstrative concept, and in addition, she has acquired a correct demonstrative belief in terms of that new concept. That's what the one who defends the demonstrative view would propose. So here is what I would like to say. We should, I suggest, describe Mariana's epistemic progress in a very different manner. We should admit, first, Mariana has acquired new, genuine property concepts, phenomenal concepts of the various experiential properties involved in color vision. At least we can imagine her as having done this. Before she looks at the slides, we can imagine that she has looked at many, many, many examples in which something appears blue to her. And she was able to isolate the commonality of those experiences, the commonality in their phenomenology, the commonality in what it's like for her to have all those experiences. And in that way, she can have acquired a genuine property concept, a concept that involves an understanding of what it is for someone to see objects of that type. And what it is for someone consists in the way it's like, in the particular way it's like, to see something that is blue. So this is what I would like to say, that Mariana has acquired genuine property concepts of various experiential properties that are involved in color vision. In particular, the one of being visually experiencing blue. And she has, as I just already wanted to motivate, a substantial understanding of what it is for someone to have that experiential property. Why does she have a substantial understanding? Because she has an understanding of what aspect in the phenomenology of someone must be present for that subject to have that experiential property. And in addition now, when she comes to the conclusion that it's the blue slide that shows the color of that people see when they look at the sky, she has acquired a new correct belief in terms of that new property concept. Now, of course, she also has a demonstrative belief. While looking at the blue slide, Mariana also entertains the demonstrative belief that people with normal color vision experience that color when they see the cloudless sky during the day, or that they have that phenomenal type of color experience in those conditions. But her relevant new phenomenal belief about the experience of others should not be identified, or so I claim, with that demonstrative belief. Rather, we should say the following. Her disposition to form the relevant demonstrative belief is only a manifestation of her new belief about others, which is couched in terms of her new phenomenal concept, in virtue of her understanding of what it is for a subject to have the property, she attributes via that concept. So when she has this conviction that it's this slide that shows the color of the sky as the sky appears to normally sighted people, then she applies to other people, I would say, a genuine property concept. She now thinks that a certain aspect is present in their phenomenology, and that's to apply a genuine property concept. And she will say, it's this color, or it's this type of experience that I'm now having. But we can explain why she has these demonstrative beliefs, given her genuine phenomenal belief, her belief in terms of genuine property concepts. So there is this relation of manifestation between a belief in terms of a phenomenal concept and a corresponding demonstrative belief. But it's not the same thing. We should not identify those beliefs with one another. I have an example that I would like to use in order to illustrate this relation between a genuine property concept and a demonstrative concept that might make this even a little clearer. I'm wondering, I could leave this out, and I like the example, but I see it's already 42. Is it better that I leave it out and go directly to the...
I think we don't have we're not in a hurry.
We are not in a hurry.
Yeah.
So I may talk about Timyana. That's beautiful. I like that example. Timyana it's a crazy science fiction story. I hope you have nothing against such thought experiments. So Timyana is an intelligent lizard that lives on a distant planet. And she has a language also, she can reason and so on and so on. But she's a completely different kind of animal than we are. And one thing that is very different in her case is she has the capacity to zoom in on objects in her environment in order to see the internal chemical structure. So, for example, she can zoom in on water and see the structure, the composition of the molecular composition of H2O, so to speak, see by zooming in. On a certain date, after May 13th, zooming in on water, Timyana acquires, let's say, a new structure concept. And she calls that structure concept structure 1. Her new structure concept is a genuine property concept. I left out an important part of the example, which makes it parallel to Mariana. For some reason, like Mariana has been prevented from seeing colors, Timyana has been prevented from zooming in. Normally, those lizards zoom in all the time, like we see colors all the time. But Timyana, for some reason, has been prevented from doing this. And then, on a certain day, suddenly she is allowed to do that. Like Mariana suddenly is allowed to see colors, she is allowed to do the zooming in. Now, when she zooms in on water and sees that structure, so really sees the type of composition of various molecules, she can form a property concept. Also, I would like to say, she has a certain understanding of that structure just by being perceptually presented with that structure. And so she has a genuine new property concept of that structure, and she may introduce a term for it and call it structure 1. When zooming in on other occasions on liquid in a glass which is actually full of water, Timyana will also form the demonstrative belief that this is the internal structure of liquid in Swiss rivers. So did I say that she believes of Swiss? Yes, I should say this. For some reason, she believes that the liquid in Swiss rivers has structure 1. And there she uses her property concept of that structure in that belief. Like Mariana uses her property concept of being presented with the tonality blue when she finally believes that nobody sighted people see the sky as blue. So Temyana uses her structure concept, which is a genuine structure concept. But like in the case of Temyana, she has the disposition to form certain demonstrative beliefs. So since she has that structure concept, when she zooms in on something that actually is water, she will also form the demonstrative belief that this is the kind, is the internal structure that liquids have in Swiss rivers. But this is so only because she has the corresponding belief in terms of her genuine property concept. Temyana's demonstrative belief, while zooming in on water, that this is the structure of the liquid in Swiss rivers, is a manifestation of her belief couched in her new structure concept, in virtue of her understanding of what it is to have that structure. And in that case too, and I think that's why I introduced that case, I think it's very clear in the case of Temyana that if a peri-philosopher came up on that distant planet where there are those lizards and would say that the concepts that people have of the internal structure of things are mere demonstrative concepts, that person would be wrong. The real relation between the property concept that people acquire on that planet, and we can also imagine that they have chemistry and they have even other ways to form a structure concept, but structure concept is also related to their perceptual capacity to recognize it, to recognize that the property is instantiated. So it would be certainly a mistake for such a philosopher to say that the concept that people have of internal structure on that planet, that lizards have on that planet, is simply a demonstrative concept. It's the same relation like in the case of Mariana, I would like to say. We have manifestation, but not identity between the property concept on the one hand and the corresponding demonstrative concepts. So here is the thesis that I already announced that will play a crucial role in the argument against physicalism about experiential properties. And I call that thesis the thesis of phenomenal essentialism. And the thesis tells us that maximally specific pure phenomenal concepts of pure experiential properties are nature revealing. And here I still have to clarify a few things because you have technical terminology coming in here. I'm not saying this of all phenomenal concepts, and I'm not saying it of all experiential properties. So here is one thing that we need, namely the definition of what it is for a property to be a pure experiential property. A property is a pure experiential property if and only if, due to the nature of that property, due to what it is to have that property, the following two conditions hold. There is some specific way it's like to have that property, such that whenever someone has it, whenever it's instantiated, I should say, then there is a subject for whom it's like that, like in that specific way, to have that property on that particular occasion. And furthermore, having that property consists in what it's like to have that property. So not all experiential property, in the sense that I defined earlier, are pure experiential properties. First of all, it could be that a property is an experiential property. It by its nature, there is always a way it's like to have it. And yet the way it's like to have it is not the same for all subjects that have that property. an example one could take is to be thinking about a certain city, to be thinking about Paris, for instance. If you are attracted by what people call cognitive phenomenology, that is, you agree that to be thinking about a city is something experiential, that is, there is something that it's like to do this, then you must say to be thinking about Paris is an experiential property in the sense defined. However, to be thinking about Paris could be very different for different people. And what makes them, what the commonality that makes it the case that they all have this experiential property is related to causal facts, namely that Paris plays some role in the genesis of that thought in some way. So this is an example that shows not every experiential property is fulfills the first condition, but also for the second. But let me take an example where we have the first fulfilled and the second is not fulfilled. Many people accept there's something like agentive phenomenology. And in particular, some accept, and I'm among them, that when you act, then you are aware of yourself in a phenomenally manifest manner as the one who brings about what happens, something like that. Terry Horgan calls this the experience of self as source. And it's plausible to think that this is part of acting. It's not that you act and then there is an experience in addition, but acting is experiential. Acting includes that you are in a certain way aware of your own acting. And it's also plausible to say, or to propose at least, that the specific aspect of your phenomenology, which is this awareness of your own acting, is the same for different people who act. So if this is true, then the first condition would be fulfilled. But acting, of course, is not phenomenally constituted. To be acting doesn't simply consist in being in a certain phenomenological state, in having a phenomenology with a certain aspect. It involves that, in the case of bodily movement, you actually move your body, something happens. So it's not phenomenally constituted, which means that the condition B is not fulfilled. The thesis that I will propose of phenomenal essentialism only applies to those experiential properties that are pure in the sense that they fulfill A and B in that definition. I also still have to clarify what I mean by maximally specific pure phenomenal concepts that occur in that thesis. And here are the two conditions that I propose. So a phenomenal concept, now it's a distinction on the level of concepts. I was talking about a distinction on the level of properties a moment ago. Now I'm talking about a distinction on the level of the concepts. The phenomenal concept C is a maximally specific, pure phenomenal concept of a given experiential property if and only if the following holds. A thinker uses that concept. A thinker using that concept thinks of the relevant property in terms of a specific way that it's like to have it. And the thinker thereby takes the property to be a pure experiential property, a property which is constituted by that specific way it's like to have it that is mentioned in the first condition. Okay, now I have defined the two notions that occur in the thesis of phenomenal essentialism, that occurred in what I said before. Sorry, I have to look at this. No, there's another definition, of course, that I need, because the thesis was that certain phenomenal concepts are nature revealing. So I have to explain what it is for a concept to be nature revealing. And here is what I mean by this. A concept of a property is nature revealing if and only the following holds. A thinker who has acquired the concept thereby fully understands what it is for something to have the property. So nothing about the condition that makes it the case that something has the property is cognitively hidden to the one who has a nature-revealing concept of that property. An example that I like to take, and independently of one another, Philip Goff also has chosen this example, is the mathematical notion of sphericity. So it's very plausible to say that someone who understands sphericity as fulfilling the following condition: an object is spherical if and only if there is a point such that all points of the surface of that thing, of that object, have the same distance to that point, really understands what sphericity consists in. He knows what it is for an object to be spherical. So I think that's an example that may illustrate what it is for a concept to be nature revealing. So, and here is an argument for phenomenal essentialism. So for one of the premises that I will use in the final argument, premise one: the nature of every pure experiential property is exhausted by its contribution to the overall phenomenology of the state of any subject instantiating it. So in the case of pure experiential properties, it's only the specific aspect of the phenomenology whose presence makes it the case that you have that property. That makes it, okay, that it's only that, so to speak. It simply consists in that. It's only contribution to the phenomenology of someone having the property that is relevant. The nature is exhausted by it. Contrary to the example of acting, there the nature of acting, despite the fact that it's an experiential property, according to the view that I proposed, would not be exhausted by the contribution of having the property to the overall phenomenology of a subject who has the property. So the first premise is about the nature of pure experiential properties, and the second premise is about the access that one can have of such properties via certain phenomenal concepts, namely maximally specific pure phenomenal concepts. A thinker who has acquired the pure phenomenal concept of a pure experiential property thereby fully understands what having that property contributes to the phenomenology of the subject's overall state. And if this is so, if this is true of a thinker, then according to premise one, the thinker really has fully understood what it is for someone to have that property, and this is the consequence, the thesis of phenomenal essentialism. A thinker who has acquired the maximally specific pure phenomenal concept of a pure experiential property thereby fully understands the nature of that property. I leave out this objection and go directly to the argument from understanding for property dualism. First premise, conceptual independence. This is a premise that most people involved in the discussion about physicalism with respect to consciousness accept. Phenomenal concepts of pure experiential properties are conceptually independent of any physical concepts. And what do I mean by conceptually independent? Here is a definition, and they are on the last part of the slide. The property concept C1 of the property E1 and the property concept C2 of the property E2 are cognitively independent if and only if an ideally rational epistemic subject who has acquired both concepts can believe that a given thing entity has the first property conceptualized under Conception, and at the same time disbelieve that that very same thing has the second property conceptualized under the other concept, and vice versa. That's cognitive independence. Second premise, phenomenal essentialism that we just saw. Third premise, cognitive transparency, as I would like to call it. If you have two concepts that both reveal the nature of one and the same property, then these concepts are not conceptually independent. So here the idea is, if really both give you access to the very nature of the property, then you must be in a position to recognize that something that falls under the first concept must also fall under the second, and vice versa. Otherwise, something must have remained cognitively hidden to you if you are not in a position to discover this by reasoning. Premise 4, this is a sufficient condition for physicality. If there is a nature-revealing phenomenal concept of a property and no nature-revealing physical concept of that property, then that property has a non-physical nature. I think this must have a certain prima facie plausibility, but it's a possibility for the physicalist to deny it. But I hope when you think about it a little, it would be very strange to accept that the property can be a physical property, even though no possible concept that may be called a physical concept can reveal the nature of it. But we can fully understand what it is to have the property via a phenomenal concept. That would be a very strange thing to accept. And then we can draw the consequences from the first three premises. For any pure experiential property, there is a nature-revealing phenomenal concept, but no nature-revealing physical concept. And then we get the consequence that we want. Any pure experiential property has a non-physical nature. So as I said, the physicalist can deny premise 4. Denying premise 4 is to endorse the idea that some physical properties are such that they have a pure phenomenal nature. They have a pure phenomenal nature in the sense that you can totally grasp what it is to have the property at issue in phenomenal terms. They only concern, so to speak, what it's like to have it. That's their nature. However, that phenomenal nature cannot be captured by any physical concept. It seems to me that one can have doubts about whether this is still physicalism. And it's quite plausible to think that the idea that dualists with respect to experiential properties would like to defend is really captured by accepting what we have here on the slide. That no physical concept could ever allow us to understand the nature of a property. And the property has a pure phenomenal nature. Isn't that enough to be a dualist? So it's not a very convincing way to escape for the physicalist if the physicalist really is forced to deny this premise 4 that you had here, the sufficient condition for physicality. Okay, that would be all that I wanted to present.